latest feedback I've received, although we've had some clearing up of the weather earlier today, there was another downpour now in the afternoon in the vicinity or at the mine itself. Also, in parallel to that, we are looking at areas on the strategic stockpile where the coal is not that wet, and where we can extract a product that will be able, that we can handle it through the system to bring in coal. But as we still stand risk of losing a unit at Unit 2 currently is at risk at Letabo, and we're closely monitoring to keep the running units going at Letabo. Maybe just also in terms of the units returned, it's good that we have managed to return the Medupi Unit 5 this afternoon, which returned about 2 o'clock. Also, just earlier, Majuba 6 as well as Majuba 4 early in the morning, that is returned. And we're still pressing to get Camden 8 also to return to service still today. And then as also indicated to if we can get coal supply better established and more reliable to Letabo to return one or more of the units of Letabo tomorrow, also at Tucana Camden unit. All in all, we had to apply the also the stage 6 load shedding over the weekend. I see that there was a question also relating to the Koeberg incident that we've experienced over the weekend, where we've incurred a trip on Koeberg Unit 2. And the reason for that is that we've had a trip coming from Channel 1 on the turbine protection side. So it was not a reactor trip, but only the turbine that trip. It was a planned intervention that we've scheduled for the Friday, because the Friday evening, because of a risk of a trip, but it was necessary to do that, to do a car change. And on the car change, we did have then the trip that occurred. And subsequently, with the reactor not being tripped and the team being able to keep the reactor at low power whilst rectifying the problem on the turbine, the unit then actually returned very well overnight to the next morning. The impact that it had in a larger scheme is that it did impact us in not having adequate pumping capability overnight because of that loss of the megawatts from the 900 megawatts from Koeberg. And that then resulted us in not being able to do the extent of pumping that we would normally have done overnight on the Friday evening. I will pause there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I think that concludes the overview. Sikonati, let's then, I think, go immediately to our questions and answers.
I mean, about the history of
not joined us unless he's here and if he wishes to add something. If he's not, then I think let's go straight to Q&A.
Thank you, Andre. Jan Oberholzer will be landing at 3:30, so he's en route to South Africa at this point. Andre, before we go on to the questions, I'm going to ask you to give us a bit of information on the diesel funding that you alluded to, that obviously will be quite a matter of interest for the media. How much money have we secured and how and for what period, please? Thank you.
So Sikonati, it's not a definite amount because we are obviously continuing to consume diesel, to buy diesel as we go on. But we have obtained the support of National Treasury to give assurance to the banks from whom we are borrowing money to buy the diesel that National Treasury will stand behind these loans, and that has given us the ability to ease the liquidity constraint, and we can therefore continue to purchase the requisite diesel to maintain the supply to our open cycle gas turbines.
Thank you, Andre. That deals with William Horn's question. Mohammed, you've got quite a great sense of humor. I have now put on for you a beautiful background. Let's deal with William's questions first. The diesel matter has now been dealt with properly. William, you want to know, is there an official provision being made for stage 8? And if not, why not? Has the National Defence Force made any arrests, prevented any suspicious activity at any power stations as of yet? Andre, our load shedding timetable allows us to implement up to stage 8 load shedding. Let me invite Sekhumozo to perhaps comment on that question. And Karen Pillay, I am not sure if she's online yet. Colleagues, if anyone is not here, please do bear in mind the short notice. Other people had appointments they couldn't come. Sekhumozo, are you able to talk to us about stage 8, please? I do not think we have Sekhumozo on the line here, Andre. Please talk to us. Can you address the question and indeed the one for the security? Thank you.
So again, just to reiterate that the reason that we implement load shedding in the first instance is to allow us to maintain a 50 hertz frequency on the grid. If we were to lose that frequency because of a shortage of generation capacity, we will then have a total grid collapse, and that will take anything from 10 to 14 days to resolve, and will no doubt have very severe negative impact. So load shedding is the lever that we use to protect the system from a total blackout. I just had a conversation half an hour ago with our national system operator, Isabel Fick, and she again gave me the assurance that the probability of a total system blackout remains very low because of the fact that we have the levers of load shedding, but also the support of our major industrial and mining customers in implementing load curtailment, which then assists us in managing demand during peaks where we have very high demand. So we do have contingency plans in place should there be a further loss in generation capacity. At this point in time, we do not anticipate that there is a risk of going beyond stage 8. So that is part of our contingency planning that is in place. I don't particularly want to elaborate too much on that, but I can give the country the assurance that we're doing everything in our power to ensure that we do not end up in a situation where we go beyond that. I think the further 2,000 megawatts that remains at our disposal is more than adequate to offset any further issues. But of course, the system has an inherent lack of reliability, and that gives us the need to plan for these unforeseen events. So at this point in time, the anticipation is that we will remain at stage 6 load shedding until past evening peak on Wednesday, and probably going until 5 o'clock on Thursday morning, after which time we will go to load shedding stage 4. So at this stage, no need for us to contemplate going any further than that. If I can also deal with the question raised around the SANDF. The SANDF, of course, doesn't have powers of arrest. These arrests are carried out by the South African Police Services. They have now made, I think the last tally that I saw was 48 arrests. And these arrests are of people actively involved in various criminal activities throughout Eskom. In particular, in Mpumalanga, coal theft, issues related to damage of plant and so forth. And we're very pleased that we are now seeing some significant progress in the battle against crime and corruption, that we are not as vulnerable as we have historically been. However, we still need to get to the higher echelons of the syndicates, and this is where we anticipate that some of the intelligence that we are sharing with the SSA as well as with crime intelligence, that this will start to bear fruit. Arresting the foot soldiers by themselves is not going to help us with addressing the issue. Thanks, Sikonathi.
I thank you, Andre. Lamiz Omarji from News 24. Your question on Quebec, Thomas really dealt with that in significant detail before you asked it. And we also did issue a statement that explained exactly what happened to that during the last week. Thomas, I'm going to ask you to give an update on the energy availability factor on that. And then the question from Christian Engel of Cape Argus is, did Eskom postpone some of its planned maintenance to avoid going into stage 8 load shedding last night? Thomas, Andre, can I ask you to switch off your camera so we allow Thomas to come in? Thank you.
Thank you, Sikonathi. Firstly, then to deal with the question relating to the energy availability factor. Currently, our year-to-date energy availability factor is just over 53%, which is very low. And the question also been asked, and where I've also gave some indication earlier in previous meetings, is that for us to achieve 60% by year end is not possible, given that we've only got a few weeks left in the financial year. What has really set us back in not achieving the 60%, which we were working towards, was also the fact that we've got this very high unplanned unavailability that we're currently experiencing, combined also with the planned maintenance that we are doing. Bearing in mind that when we were doing our projections and our forecasting for year end, we didn't anticipate for the Kusile units, all three, to be off for the extended period that they now going to be off. Adding to then the question that's been asked relating to the plant maintenance situation. Yes, we originally did plan for higher plant maintenance. Not to disregard that we've had a fairly high PCLF, also plant maintenance opportunity now over this Christmas New Year period, and we will still see a high PCLF plant maintenance up till until about Easter, and we will see towards the end of the financial year there will still be high plant maintenance. We did, however, following when it became clear that we're not going to have the Kusile units returning earlier and being available sooner, we then had to redo our capacity plan, and what it basically saying, to take into consideration that 2,160 megawatts will not be available. We had to critically look at our outage schedule, also to see where we can optimize. We could manage to optimize on some of the outages, not to compromise safety or statutory outages in any way. So those we continue to doing our philosophy outages also, but we had to also relook at that, and that obviously is aggravated by the high levels of unplanned unavailability that we are currently experiencing. Yes, if we've had a further 2,000 planned maintenance currently on the go, it would have impacted us and on even higher stages of load shedding. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I assume this is Banele Gininza from Independent Newspapers, the next set of questions. Has the frequency of transformer blowouts increased comparatively with the frequency of load shedding? Mondebala is the Group Executive for Distribution. He is going to help answer that question. Monde, are you seeing more transformers being blown out during load shedding in your areas? And before you go, you come in, Bele, can I ask the last 3 questions from him as well? Has Eskom had to make higher financial provision for the procurement and repair of transformers, especially since it had to resort to continuous load shedding? That's again for you, sir. And let's take this last one, this third one for him. How has the spike in cable theft, particularly when power lines are down, affected Eskom's cost overruns? Monde?
Yeah, no, thanks, Konati, and thanks to Manele for the questions. In as far as transformers are concerned, we have not noticed a significant spike in the transformer failures. We have, however, noticed a significant increase in the failure of other equipment, such as our breakers and some of our cables, which are overly exposed. This leads into the next question of us experiencing a significant number of infrastructure theft and vandalism, specifically during the times of load shedding, because the criminals out there, they know that if it's a 2-hour session of load shedding, they've got 2 hours to do their nefarious activities. Yes, this has increased quite tremendously our repair costs, which then has affected our maintenance budget quite significantly. Yeah, Sonata, I believe I have touched on all the 3 questions. Thank you.
And before you go, Monde, have you had to fire any of our contractors due to cable theft?
Yeah, at this point in time, we are following whatever reports are submitted to us. We do have reports of some of our staff and some of our contractors that may be involved in these activities. Yeah, I think when we do get those reports, we take it through the law enforcement, through our security. But yeah, I cannot confirm at this point in time whether or not we have fired any of our contractors for these activities.
Thank you, Monde. I must add, Banele, on that it's not just a matter of firing someone because one of their employees were caught stealing a cable. There's a whole process that would need to be undertaken in order to establish the guilt or otherwise of the employer themselves. And there are, of course, disciplinary measures where contractor employees have been caught in the wrong. Antoinette Slave, your question has really been answered by Thomas on whether there is any chance of reaching 60% EAF by the end of this March 2023. So I'm going to take Siphelele Hludla's question. He is from Business Report. Has Eskom been planning or communicating around stage 8 load shedding contingency measures? Again, Andre has really dealt with that, but maybe I can, in Isabel, to come in and give us comment on any contingency plans for stage 8 load shedding. She is the general manager in the system operator's office. Isabel, please.
Good afternoon. We are currently in the process of reviewing the document that governs the load shedding, NRSO 48-9. This is a NERSA document. It is also being put to the industry. Therefore, it is still busy going through the governance processes. Yes, we are looking at the different stages of load shedding. In terms of contingency, we do have contingency should we reach stage 8. We will then give the necessary levels through to the other control centers. But as Andre has mentioned, we don't anticipate that at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. I'm taking the next question coming from Craig Mocker. It is noted from a recent analysis by Darrell Hunt that Eskom would have saved 3 billion rand if it had switched from diesel to term and not spot LNG to generate the same 1.9 terawatt hours in 2022. Noting that Thomas Conradi confirmed that Eskom would release an LNG supply request for proposal in a recent media briefing. Is Eskom considering to include LNG supply as part of its emergency response plan? Thomas, you did talk to this during last week, but maybe Andre or Tom Skinner is also here to talk to us about the options there. Thank you.
Yeah, Sikanati, let me have a stab at that. Yes, based on current term prices, LNG would indeed be more cost effective than diesel. Of course, if we had a wholesale license, then the saving would be far smaller, but that's a topic for another day. But in order for us to use LNG at scale, we would need to be able to import the LNG, gasify it again, and then transport it to probably Ankerlig, but also possibly including Gerikwa. And this requires a significant investment in infrastructure. It also requires pressure reducing stations and so forth. Now, because our likely utilization of natural gas is too low to warrant investment in importation facilities, what we are looking for is an aggregator of demand, which will then enable us to import gas and in conjunction with other consumers of gas. And that should then assist the overall reduction in fuel cost, particularly at Ankerlig. If we are to pursue a 3,000 megawatt, that will be a combined cycle gas turbine project at Richards Bay, that will justify an FSRU and also associated pipeline infrastructure. However, we wish to buy gas over the fence at a contractually determined price and at a certain pressure and a certain volume. We do not particularly wish to invest in gas infrastructure. So again, for the Richards Bay project, we are looking at somebody who can aggregate that demand. We are discussing the matter with Transnet. Sikanati, just also in response to Banele's question on action taken against contractors, we have recently issued letters to 15 companies and or directors who have, in our opinion, and after thorough consideration, been guilty of transgressing Eskom's Supplier Integrity Pact. There are a further 230 of these cases that our Supplier Review Committee needs to work through. But as you said, this is a very difficult process because it is subject to legal challenge. So we have to make absolutely sure before we issue such a letter. Thanks.
Thank you, Andre. Thomas, I'm going to give you the next two questions, one from Antoinette Slavet. Can you say now what you will do differently in future to ensure that maintenance is more effectively? And that is on your coal plant, because last week you did indicate that there were discussions about improving the performance of the power stations. Let's link that to Kyle's question. 24. This marks the fourth time in the past 2 months that Eskom has been forced to implement stage 6 load shedding. Is this indicative of coal units reaching a level of unreliability that has not been seen before? In other words, is Eskom seeing a higher level of unreliability over the last couple of months compared to the same period last year? Thomas?
Thank you very much. Firstly, to respond to say that yes, the maintenance of our plant is a key factor in terms of the poor performance of our plant. Although there are also other reliability issues that we need to address in terms of the amount of trips that we're incurring on the plant. In a number of cases, those trips are also as a result of a plant failure or of a specific incident that happened on the plant, causing the plant to actually trip. We realize that a lot needs to be done in terms of improving our maintenance. That is both in terms of online maintenance, meaning whilst the plant is running, and there we're also dealing with some of the systemic issues, making sure that we've got spares and the right quality of spares, the right level of workmanship and quality being applied while we're maintaining the plant. We have seen in the past that we are paying the price also in terms of plant not as reliable and available as we want due to not the best of maintenance practices being applied or the wrong quality of spares being used on our plant. That obviously takes some time to work it out. We are also have changed our approach towards being much more selective in terms of making sure that our suppliers are reputable suppliers, that they are able to do the work to the levels of quality. We're also engaging with original equipment manufacturers of specific machinery, especially complex machinery, where we believe it is for the OEM to support us in terms of maintaining those plants. A lot of generations improvement that we require in terms of the performance of the plant will come from our plant maintenance interventions. These are the outages that we do have, the offline maintenance that we need to do. And yes, we are not seeing yet the level of performance that we want from these outages. We are investing a lot in terms of improving our outage readiness, making sure that we procure the long lead space up front, having all contracts secured with reputable suppliers, and be in a position that when that unit goes on outage to have a very well set up plan, a project plan, and being able to execute that outage best once the breaker opens. We are closely monitoring also in terms of what we're experiencing a post outage, in terms of if we do have further breakdowns or non-availability after the event, after the outage, and by that to understand if it's a scoping problem, are we not doing all the work that we can or should have done on that unit, or is the matter of quality of workmanship or other reasons that unit is not delivering to the expectation post outage. So there's a lot going into in terms of the outage, the maintenance improvement on our plant, both routine maintenance. We're also investing in terms of all the maintenance practices, the planning of work and the execution thereof, both online and offline maintenance. In terms of the question relating to the stage 6 and if that's indicative of the plant further deteriorating, I think what aggravates the situation here and why we've particularly went into stage 6, yes, we have seen a high number of trips in the last 2 days, but it is also aggravated by the fact that we've had really battling at the number of plants also with coal qualities, and we've had also incidents of loss of units as a result of a coal supply to our plants. If you take a plant like Letabo Power Station, who's normally running quite well, and having 3 of those units off currently, that obviously has got a significant impact of 1800 megawatts of those 3 units. And that's mainly, as I've indicated earlier, relating to the inclement weather and the coal supply problems towards that to that plant. So I think it's a combination of the plant not performing as we want in terms of the reliability and availability of the fleet, combined to these specific incidents that we've had now lately. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm going to ask Isabel Fick to come back to start first with the question from Susan Komori of Amapungane. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the particular question. Eskom previously said it would release its long-term outlook in mid-February. Are you able to share that document now? If not, could you confirm whether or not Eskom plans to maintain the baseline of 13,000 megawatts of unplanned capacity losses going forward, or will this be revised up or downwards? Isabel, before you answer that, let's link it to the questions from Gloria Sifako from the SABC. How far are the plans to import power from Zambia and Mozambique to supplement Eskom's capacity? And lastly, from Business Tech, Quinton Bronkhorst wants to know how many megawatts are currently being cut through load reduction and load curtailment. He says some areas in Centurion, for example, have been moved to a load curtailment schedule. Can we expect more areas being moved onto this type of schedule? Sabra?
A lot of questions there. Thanks, Sukunati. Let's start with Susan. I'm not sure what you refer to if you talk about the long-term outlook. From our side, we do a winter plan and a summer plan, and the winter plan is done and released in March, not in April. So no, we don't have a document to share at this point. In terms of the baseline, you're working on the three scenarios that we pressure test the capacity plan on. That would be the base scenario at this stage is 13,000 plus 1.5 plus 1.5. We will review the performance and then adjust the baseline as necessary. From what we see right now, yes, it could possibly be moved up to a higher level. In terms of load curtailment or load reduction, I think we have a bit of problems with terminology here. Load curtailment is what we do in terms of our large customers who are able to assist us by dropping load when we are constrained. So that is a different scenario than what I think you are talking to, because you're talking to localized events in the Centurion area, which would typically be domestic and smaller industries, and those would fall under the Tshwane municipality and not under Eskom. So I really can't speak to what is happening there. From our perspective, we issue the order for load shedding, and then the specific amount of load per area needs to be shed. How that is done resides with the specific municipalities or metros.
Thank you, Isabel. Before you go, please, can you just answer quickly Lamise's question? Is load curtailment being implemented with industrial users?
Sorry, Sukunati, is it implemented with?
Industrial users, please.
Yes, we do have contracts with large industrial users. It is built into their contracts that we can actually curtail them. So it is part of the contract and the tariff structure for those customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Chris, your question on Quebec 2, was the trip a mistake or expected when relating to an electronic card? Chris, I do not think we have Keith in this meeting here. We can help you offline later with your question, but we did deal with the Quebec question quite significantly. Oh, Keith is in there. He's just raised his hand. Keith, please come in and assist us here.
So, yes, thanks, Ikonati. And in responses to Chris's question, it was ultimately, if you look at it, any trip when you're doing work like that is a human error, but it was a high-risk activity that we had identified the need to do the work. I think it was around about Tuesday during the week. Because of the high risk of trip with the activity that was needed, we scheduled with transmission and system operating to do it on Friday night. The work that was being done, we had done something similar in the past, There was a lot of precautions that were taken, which was why we were able to turn around the unit so quickly from the event that happened. But we are still trying to internalize exactly why the unit tripped during that replacement. It was clearly the replacement of the card that resulted in the trip, but we don't know the exact reasons why. That is, so it's still under investigation. But clearly, if you take it to the true essence of the word, because it was a human involved in doing the work, you have to say it was human error. Thanks.
Thank you, Keith. Colleagues, Keith Featherstone is the Chief Nuclear Officer. Keith, please do lower your hand so we can move on to the next one. Deneen Erasmus from Business Day. Are there any emergency measures in place, and would it be practically possible to source coal from other suppliers if the supplier to Letabo continues to be affected by rain and flooding? Thomas, you really did deal with that and with digging into the strategic stockpile to alleviate the pressures at Letabo. Do you want to add anything to Deneen's question, please?
Yes, I can. Thank you for the question also. Yes, in fact, we have imported some coal via truck also over the weekend, although fairly small volumes. One must appreciate that to really bring in the amount of coal that's been consumed by a power plant like Letabo, especially who's burning a fairly low CV coal, you don't overnight can get that infrastructure and that the logistics established to get all the coal being imported, and also taking into mind that Letabo is fairly removed from the Mpumalanga coal fields here in the northern Free State. So yes, we did import some coal. We don't foresee that this the problem is going to be persistent for weeks on end, and that's why we are hopeful that if the weather gives us a break, and which is indicating that we will get some break as from tomorrow, that we will be able to normalize matters at Letabo. Also to take note that there is a lot of coal at Letabo with a stockpile. It is just very wet. Also in transporting coal to the power station itself, whilst it's raining, and you also got the risk of bringing a very wet product to the station, which will then defeat the object. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. The next question comes from Rorisang Hosana from Times Live. Since 2 units at Koeberg will be operating during July and August, does that mean we will expect low stages of load shedding during the winter months? Andre, I think you have to repeat what you said about Koeberg and about Kusile and about Medupi, the unit there, in order to give us the prognosis going into the winter. Can you help us with that? And you have already dealt with the question of diesel and gas at the OCGTs, which has dealt with Helmo's questions. Do you want to come in there, please?
Yeah, Sigonati, I really don't have too much else to add. I think we covered it fairly extensively in my introduction. So maybe if Helmo can elaborate on his questions, but I have nothing further to add there. Thanks.
Andre, the question before that, please, from the one immediately, the one on winter load shedding. The prognosis is that, or the plan is to return Unit 1 of Koeberg late June. Rorisang wants to know if that means lower stages of load shedding during the winter months, since the other unit will be running as well.
Right, apologies for that. No, it doesn't necessarily mean the lower stages of load shedding. It obviously is planned to return for those 2 months because of the fact that we want to cater for higher demand during winter season. During winter, our plants generally operate very well. First of all, we have lower planned maintenance. This is to again create capacity on the system for the higher demand. We also have colder air, which means that our vacuum load losses are abated, and cold air is denser, so there is more available oxygen, which enhances combustion, so that helps. And then also we have typically no rain in the Mpumalanga area during winter, which helps us with any negative impact of rain on coal quality. So the outlook for winter is not entirely gloomy, but we do expect higher demand because of the colder weather. Thanks.
Thank you, Andre. Colleagues, I must say, 5 minutes ago, we closed down the chat box so as to release my colleagues as soon as possible in order for them to permit me to have this media briefing again should we need it. Deneen and Chris Yelland, I'm going to skip your questions on blank check to acquire diesel. No one gets a blank check in the real world for anything. And Chris, we really dealt with the diesel question immediately in the introduction, and none of this is free money. It is Eskom that will still be raising loans, as Andre did say, to acquire diesel. So let us skip that and go straight to Kyle Cohen's next questions. Has the Department of Environmental Affairs responded yet to Eskom's request for a minimum emissions standard exemption around the temporary stacks at Kusile? Does the plan to build those stacks still makes the most sense since in terms of the timeline to repair the flue decks chimney for unit 1, 2, and 3? Andre, have we received a response from the Environmental Affairs Department on whether we can proceed to build the temporary stacks? And is that the most sensible thing to do at this point?
Yes, it definitely is the most sensible thing to do. If we are able to receive this approval, which we haven't yet obtained, we're in the process of engaging with Minister Creasy's department to obtain this, and she has undertaken to give it expedited attention. So while we obviously cannot bind the minister to reach a certain decision, she has given us the assurance that she will give it urgent attention. We have, however, taken a decision to place an order for the steel required to build the 3 temporary flues, and we are in urgent discussions with the contractor to ensure that we can bring the 3 units back by commissioning the 3 flues by December of this year. So it's all systems go, and we are running processes in parallel in order to ensure that we don't lose any time and that we have the necessary sense of urgency to bring these units back as soon as possible.
Thanks, Andre. Chris, your question on why is the data portal down? We are unable to see the load factor on the OCGTs for the last month. What has been the load factor? I'm going to ask Isabel to answer what the questions on the load factors. Eskom is definitely aware of the problem of the portal being down, and our IT department is working on restoring it as soon as possible. Are you able to tell us, Isabel, please, what the load factors are for the OCGTs during the last few days or weeks? Thank you.
Sikonathi, we can get the exact figures out, but it is in the order of around 10%.
Thank you. Nice and quick. Kyle, your next question, what proportion of the units that tripped over the past week or more were units that were brought back from planned maintenance? Thomas, do you know if your machines still keep breaking after returning from planned maintenance? And can we look at Helmo's question as well? When will Eskom change its 52-week outlook or unplanned outage assumption? The unplanned outage assumption of 13,000 megawatts looks unrealistic, given that on Sunday we had a 63% higher unplanned outages at 21,400. Are you able to comment on both those, Thomas Conradi, please?
Thank you. In terms of the planning basis of 13,000, Isabel did respond earlier on that one. So yes, we are reconsidering that, given that we currently seeing a much higher levels of unplanned unavailability than what was the original.
Thomas, you've just muted yourself. Please go just a few seconds back.
Sorry, apologies for that. Apologies for that one. So I'm not sure where I've missed now, but just to say that, yes, we, as indicated by Isabel, we are reconsidering, seeing that we've had significantly higher unplanned unavailability over the last number of weeks than the 13,500, which we will certainly then consider also in the planning basis going forth. In terms of units, I don't have the exact detail now with me, but we certainly have seen cases where we've had post-outage unavailability, where the plant we've had some breakdown on plant on the return also. One case is we have picked up after a planned outage on a Letabo Unit 4, for instance, where we've had a boiler tube leak after extensive work been done. One must also appreciate that you know, we do the scope of work for that plant and best informed scope in terms of that unit's firstly what is required from a statutory point of view to do on that unit, but also from the performance of that unit and what defects has been identified in order to rectify that unit during that 80 or 100-day outage, depending on the duration of that specific outage. And it's not to say that everything has been worked on during that outage. That is not possible, and that we do have cases where we do have again failure of sometimes component that were not even touched during the outage, and that was not foreseen. Clearly, we'd like to get much improved reliability and availability from these outages, and we're analyzing that continuously to understand why and if we've got cases where we don't see that level of improvement. Thanks.
Thank you, Thomas Conradi. Christian Engel from the Cape Argus wants to know whether Eskom does pay or give tariff concessions to businesses that curtail demand. If so, what does this cost Eskom? Could you give at least one example of a large customer with such an arrangement and what the cost to Eskom's are? Christian, as Isabel said earlier, this is part of the regulated mechanism with NERSA, where there is a formula to compensate customers for this. I don't know, Isabel, if you have anything to add to that, do you? On load curtailment and compensation to customers? You are muted, Isabel. And please put on your camera.
Apologies for that, Sekunati. In terms of load curtailment, that is handled by the market operator, so I don't have any, and actually through our customer services in distribution. It does have an impact on the tariff. However, it is not per megawatt necessarily. So we can get the details out, I think, if it's not confidential within the contracts.
Thank you, Isabel. We will deal with that when you, in fact, I'm going to ask my colleagues in the media desk team to request that detail from distribution for you, Kristen, and we see what we can get for you. You will email you the response to your question. Featherston, this is your question from Chris Yelland. Did Eskom ever apply for or obtain an exemption from DFFE for doing an environmental impact assessment for the life extension of Koeberg?
So life extension does not constitute a change in the activity being performed, so an EIA is not required. By contrast, if Koeberg or Eskom does follow through on the intended power increase later on in its life, then the need for an EIA will be triggered.
Thank you, Keith. Mariam Issa, your question, which I couldn't read properly on the screen. Have Eskom's legal battles with Babcock in any way to higher stages of load shedding as their boiler expertise is not being utilized? Thomas, are you not able to use the expertise from Babcock Engineering for your boilers?
This matter is, thank you. This matter is still a point of discussion.
Can
And
you please coordinate the teams on the eThekwini
Sorry.
incident?
Please mute yourself.
Just to respond on that one, this is specifically to one contract in terms of boiler boiler maintenance work at some power plants. We still having contractual arrangements with Babcock in other areas of plant also where they carry specific expertise. So I don't think it will be appropriate to discuss here the merits of the case as it is still in discussion and being legally discussed. But certainly we do have the boiler contracts established at other sites with competent boiler suppliers, and it's not impacting us in terms of those specific plants, in terms of their availability or performance.
Thank you, Thomas. Please do not switch off your camera while you speak the next time. My colleagues want to see your handsome faces still. Lamis Omarji.
Apologies for that.
Lamis from News 24. You can go off now, Thomas. Is Eskom considering procuring gas from Powership if they get environmental authorization? With respect to Lamis, we really have dealt with this during the last 2 weeks and nothing has changed. Andre, if there is anything you wish to add to this, do go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing, of course, is that we won't, if we do buy something, we won't buy gas. We'd be buying electricity, but that's just maybe getting a bit technical. But we will await the resolution of the various challenges to this, and once that is resolved, then we will consider our situation. But at the moment, there is nothing new to report on this particular matter.
Thank you. The processes, Powership is still involved in its processes with the other parts of the regulation system, not Eskom yet. Thank you. Mohammed, you have not identified yourself. I shall read your questions anyway. Are there any updates on the standard offer and the emergency offer? Have any contracts been signed? And how will Eskom internal market be opened to the IPPs? Your next set of questions is, how has the uptake for phase 2 of land release been? Yes, we published that, I think, during the first week of February. Your last question, Mohammed, is what is the status of Eskom's internal investigations on its own employees fingered for corruption? Andre, I don't know if we have Andrew Etzinger on the line here to help on the standard offer. Are you able to answer or perhaps delegate somebody to? Thank you.
Sikanati, I'm online.
Oh, please proceed. Switch on your camera, Andrew. That's Andrew Etzinger, colleagues.
This relates to the standard offer program. Yeah, where we are on that, as well as the emergency generation program, we've got all the necessary approvals. We're finalizing the legal contracting between ourselves and the participants, bearing in mind that, we can draft a contract, but it's not to say that our counterparties accept it. So lawyers have to do their thing, but I would expect that we'll be good to go within the next few days. That's on the standard offer program. That's the standard price which is offered. After that, the emergency generation program, which is similar to standard offer, but is only triggered when the system is under severe constraint, because the amount paid would be a variable cost depending on basically the marginal price of the power system at that time. Which brings me to answer the third question as to when the market would roll out, and effectively that would be it. So the participants on the emergency generation program would effectively be able to bid in, and we would accept their bids or not, to reject the bids based on the pool rules and the economics surrounding the power pool. So that would effectively be a good start to a competitive bidding process in an electricity market to be rolled out. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Please, can you just give your title again before you go?
General Manager of Energy Market Services within Transmission.
I thank you, sir. The very last question, and I'm going to ask you, Honorary Director, to answer that question together with the last question from Mohammed on people that have been fingered for corruption inside Eskom. Any update there? The last question is from Antoinette Slavet. What was the coal stock days at Letabo? Did it comply with the grid code standard of 20 days? I will leave that part to Thomas. Can you just talk about the corruption and our own colleagues?
Siganati, if Thomas doesn't mind, I'll also deal with the coal question. So we are compliant with the grid code standard. We have two stockpiles, a so-called live stockpile, which is continuously replenished by the mine, and then a strategic stockpile, which is the backup stockpile that we use when the live stockpile reaches a low level. And what we found, because of the very heavy rain in the Vaal Triangle during the weekend, when that strategic stockpile was being reclaimed, that the fine coal inside that stockpile had become a slurry due to excessive moisture and was not usable. So from a tonnage perspective, yes, we were compliant with the grid code, but part of the stockpile that we had was unfortunately not usable due to the excess rain that we experienced in that area. I can conclude with Mohammed's question. We are in fact going after all employees where we suspect any involvement in untoward activity. Some of these employees, of course, resign in the face of disciplinary inquiries. We do not have powers of arrest, so where we do have evidence of criminal activity, we hand that over to the police. In our regular reports to SCOPA, we report extensively on the long list of dockets that we have submitted to the Sandton police station, where we have not, I think, received a response with the necessary urgency. So we look forward to those cases also being investigated, and if there's substance to those charges, complaints, that they then be brought before court. We are, however, collaborating very closely with the Special Investigating Unit. That uses, of course, their powers as extended to them by proclamation by the state president. And there we have scored a number of successes with assets being forfeited to the state. And there was a news release out just today of an amount of some 24.5 million rand that was unlawfully obtained by an Eskom employee. And we have since, with the cooperation of the SIU, forfeited assets to the state, and these will then be sold and the proceeds again returned to Eskom. So the process from a civil side is working. From a criminal side, I think we would appreciate some greater urgency. Thank you.
Andre, thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask you to close the meeting in a minute, but Thomas has just given me a specific number of 32.9 coal stock days at Litabo. So there is no way we are under the grid code requirement. At this point, colleagues, thank you very much for again joining the meeting at short notice. Do tolerate us for the short notices. We'd rather have you in here at short notice than have no briefing at all. And it is quite a nightmare collecting everybody and putting them here on the same diary. Any closing remarks, Menier Director?
Thank you, Sikarati. Apart from, again, asking everyone to please switch off any electrical equipment that you don't need. Please fill your kettle only to the level that you require to make your cup of tea or coffee. Please use electricity sparingly. Switch off all unnecessary lights. We are in this together, for better or for worse, and we can make a difference if we all act together by using electricity sparingly. So please, ladies and gentlemen, your cooperation in assisting us through this challenging time is very much appreciated. And with that, thank you very much for your attendance and your interest in Eskom. We are adjourned.